It was one of those ordinary mornings that felt like any other until I opened my garage and found my driveway completely blocked. Not by a random car, but by Karen, the most notorious HOA resident in our neighborhood. And she wasn't just parked, she was sitting behind the wheel, arms crossed, glaring at me as if the world owed her obedience. My first thought? This can't be happening. My second thought? Oh, it's happening, and it's going to be messy. For weeks, Karen had been creating small annoyances, complaining about paint colors, lawn ornaments, and my trash cans. But this was escalation. My car was trapped. I honked, politely at first, then more insistently. Karen didn't budge. Instead, she rolled down her window and gave me a smirk that instantly made my blood boil. "What's the big deal?" she called out, loud enough for neighbors to start peeking through their curtains. "I'm just making sure the rules are followed." I took a deep breath. I knew arguing wouldn't work. Karen thrived on attention. She lived for it. But I also knew I couldn't back down. My car was my only way to get to work, and I had a strict schedule. My phone was already in my hand, dialing the HOA and the local towing service, trying to explain the situation calmly. Every word I spoke seemed to irritate her more. Her face turned red, her grip on the steering wheel tight. She revved the engine just enough to make a point, but not enough to move. Neighbors were starting to gather, phones out, recording the spectacle. A couple of kids from the street even started whispering, "Is she really blocking the driveway?" The tension was almost cinematic, something you'd see in a movie but never expect in your quiet suburban cul-de-sac. Then came the part that made me question everything. Karen stepped out of the car, slowly, dramatically, and planted her hands on her hips. She stared me down as if daring me to take the next move. I stayed calm. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted a resolution. But at that exact moment, I knew this was turning into a story the entire street would remember. Little did Karen know, karma has a way of showing up when you least expect it. And on this morning, it was about to make a grand entrance, right in front of everyone. As Karen planted herself like a statue in the middle of my driveway, the tension in the air was almost tangible. Neighbors were whispering, phones raised, ready to capture every moment. I stayed calm, keeping my voice steady as I tried reasoning with her. "Karen, I need to leave. Can you please move your car?" I said, pointing politely toward the street. She laughed, a sharp, high-pitched laugh that made my skin crawl. "Excuse me? I am enforcing HOA rules. You know the regulations. That car of yours has been out of compliance for weeks." "Out of compliance?" I stared at her. My car was parked perfectly within the lines. Registration up to date, insurance valid. But nothing I said mattered. In Karen's world, facts were optional, and drama was mandatory. I sighed and glanced at the crowd of neighbors forming around the street. Some looked entertained, others annoyed, but all were silently watching the showdown. I knew calling the HOA wouldn't instantly solve the problem. They were notorious for slow responses. That's when I pulled out my secret weapon, the local towing service. I had spoken to them before, and they knew exactly how to handle Karen's situations. While I dialed the number, Karen noticed and stomped back toward her car. "You can't do that. I am a respected member of this community. You'll regret this." I stayed calm. "I'm not trying to create trouble. I just need my car moved so I can leave. You're welcome to call the authorities if you feel threatened." Her expression twisted from anger to panic for the briefest moment, then back to fury. She jumped back into her car, slamming the door with such force it rattled the windows of nearby houses. It was clear she was preparing for a full-blown battle of wills. But the tow truck dispatcher, calm and professional, had already confirmed they were on their way. While waiting, I started chatting with a neighbor, trying to diffuse my own tension. "This is insane," I whispered, gesturing toward Karen. "She's turning a driveway into a stage for her theatrics." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen, who claimed to uphold community rules, was now flagrantly breaking them, blocking my driveway and refusing to move. The neighbors began murmuring among themselves, some shaking their heads, others quietly cheering me on. And then, in the distance, the unmistakable rumble of a tow truck. Karen's head snapped toward the sound. Her eyes widened. The realization hit her before she could process it. Today, her antics were about to backfire in front of the entire street. The first glimpse of the tow truck made the crowd stir with excitement. Phones raised higher, whispers growing louder. Karen's confidence, so carefully constructed over the past weeks, was starting to crumble. The tow truck's rumble grew louder as it rolled down the street, lights flashing. Karen, still seated in her car, looked utterly frozen. The confident, domineering aura she had wielded just moments ago was slipping away, replaced by panic. The neighbors sensed it too, a collective anticipation hanging thick in the air. Phones were out, recording the inevitable spectacle. The driver, a tall man in a reflective vest, stepped out and approached Karen's car with calm authority. "Ma'am," he said firmly but politely, "you're parked illegally. I need to tow your vehicle." Karen's eyes widened as if she had just been struck by lightning. "What? No, you can't! I'm an HOA member! This is harassment!" she shouted, slamming her hands against the steering wheel. Her voice cracked, betraying the first signs of panic beneath the fury. The tow truck driver remained calm, methodically hooking her car to the truck. He was efficient, practiced in these kinds of standoffs. Karen tried to argue, flailing her arms, but it was clear that today her theatrics were no match for reality. Every neighbor watching could see her unraveling, an unstoppable display of karma in real time. I stood at a safe distance, heart racing but feeling a strange satisfaction. I had never wanted to humiliate anyone, but witnessing justice unfold in front of the entire street was surreal. Karen's voice grew higher and louder as the driver began lifting her car. "This is illegal! You can't do this! You can't do—" The tow truck operator, unbothered, continued his work, strapping the car securely. Karen's attempts to climb out of the car or block the process were met with gentle but firm resistance. At one point, she banged on the tow truck's side, screaming, "This is outrageous! You'll pay for this!" Yet every word fell flat. The community watched, captivated, and none of them moved to intervene on her behalf. A few brave neighbors exchanged glances, some whispering, "Finally, she's getting what she deserves." Even a couple of kids peeking from a window cheered quietly, unable to contain their excitement. Karen, however, had lost all composure. Her red face, the shaking hands, the frantic eyes, everything told a story of a woman whose control had evaporated in an instant. As the tow truck operator finished securing the car, Karen's screams continued, echoing down the street. The reality had set in. The person who had spent weeks enforcing rules on everyone else was now being held accountable in front of the entire neighborhood. Karma, swift and undeniable, had arrived. As the truck began to drive away, Karen stomped her foot, waving her arms, yelling at anyone who would listen. The street erupted into murmurs and quiet laughter, the entire scene etched into everyone's memory. For once, she wasn't in control. She was the spectacle. The tow truck slowly pulled Karen's car down the street, her frantic screams still echoing through the neighborhood. People had come out of their homes, phones in hand, unable to look away from the chaos she had created. The sheer audacity of blocking someone's driveway, combined with the public meltdown, made her the center of attention, whether she liked it or not. Karen's voice cracked as she yelled at the driver. "I demand you stop. I am a respected member of this community. You have no right." The tow operator ignored her, keeping the process professional, while I stayed back, trying not to gloat, but secretly relieved that this ordeal was almost over. Neighbors whispered among themselves, "Can you believe she did this?" Finally, someone stood up to her. Even the local mail carrier, usually quiet and distant, chuckled from his truck. Karen's reign as the self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules had crumbled spectacularly in a matter of minutes. As the tow truck turned the corner, Karen hopped out of her car in a last-ditch attempt to regain control. She stomped toward a small crowd, gesturing wildly, clearly expecting someone to support her. But the street had grown silent in disbelief. No one moved to defend her. In fact, many seemed almost amused by the irony. I took a deep breath, heart still racing. My car was finally free. The morning chaos had disrupted my schedule, but witnessing this public spectacle gave me a sense of vindication I didn't know I needed. Karen, who spent weeks policing other people's lives, had become the very person being policed. Her dramatic flair now a source of entertainment for everyone around. From the corner of my eye, I noticed one neighbor whispering into her phone, probably uploading the video for social media. I smiled wryly. This would spread far beyond our street, a perfect example of karma meeting arrogance. Karen, however, was oblivious to the implications. She continued pacing, yelling at invisible authorities, and shaking her fists at the tow truck. Her face had turned a deep shade of red, and her hair was slightly disheveled. She was a storm contained in human form, But this time the storm had no target. No one would take the bait. Finally, the tow truck disappeared from view, carrying her car and leaving Karen standing alone on the sidewalk, breathing heavily and glaring at everyone. The street was quiet, punctuated only by occasional chuckles and murmurs. For the first time, Karen was not in control. She had been outmaneuvered by reality itself, and everyone around had witnessed it. I glanced at my neighbors, offering a small, discreet nod. Their eyes reflected relief and satisfaction. Today, a lesson had been delivered. Loud, clear, and unforgettable. Karen's attempt to dominate the street had backfired spectacularly, and the memory of this morning would linger long after the tow truck was gone. By the time Karen's car disappeared around the corner, the street had settled into an almost surreal quiet. Neighbors peeked from windows, whispered to each other, or lingered on their porches, still processing what had just happened. Some smiled in disbelief, some laughed softly, and a few shook their heads at the audacity of it all. Today had been a spectacle, one no one would forget anytime soon. Karen, meanwhile, was still on the sidewalk, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line, her furious energy now simmering into frustration. The realization had finally begun to sink in. For once, she had lost control. The HOA rules she had wielded like a weapon couldn't save her now. The very thing she used to manipulate neighbors had turned against her, and it was all happening in public view. I walked slowly toward my driveway, my car now free and untouched. I took a moment to stretch, letting the adrenaline fade. My mind replayed every moment of the morning, the smirk, the shouting, the neighbors' reactions, and finally, the satisfying sight of Karma arriving on a tow truck. I had handled it calmly, without letting her dictate the narrative, and that made all the difference. From a distance, Karen muttered angrily, probably rehearsing her next complaint or planning her social media outrage. But her audience was no longer captive. Everyone had seen her unravel. Her reign as the self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules had been humiliated, and she knew it. Every gesture, every shout, every dramatic flailing of her arms had been captured on phones, ready to be shared far and wide. Later, neighbors would talk about this day for weeks. Some would laugh, some would shake their heads in disbelief, and some would simply marvel at how one person's obsession with control could lead to their own public embarrassment. It was a lesson about humility, respect, and boundaries, delivered in the most visible way possible. As I backed my car out of the driveway and drove away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and amusement. Karen's meltdown had turned what could have been a simple inconvenience into a full-blown neighborhood saga. But the best part? Justice had arrived naturally, in front of everyone. No shouting, no arguing, just a tow truck doing its job while Karen's theatrics became a story everyone would remember. Sometimes, karma doesn't knock. It shows up with flashing lights and a tow truck, making sure everyone witnesses the lesson. And for Karen, that lesson was loud, clear, and unforgettable. If you felt the shock of this Karen meltdown, hit like, because ordinary people standing up matter. Subscribe to Karen Files so you never miss real stories of justice served. And tell me in the comments, how would you have handled a crazy HOA like this?